Just get started. Can you highlight your background, what your experiences are?
Sure, Ray. And it's nice to meet you, and I hope we can help your company and your investors. I've been in intellectual property since about 1985, as it turns out. I was at IBM for 18 years. In the first 5 years there, I got over 100 patents and became the top inventor of IBM. And that achievement allowed management to ask the question, could I do some program for IBM to help IBMers invent? So for about 10 years, I created and ran the IBM Patent Factory, which is really very good because we went from about 1,000 patents to 3,500 patents a year. And that was my team that did that. And then later on, we decided to license our patents, which we weren't doing before. And we went from 20 million to several $1 billion a year.
A quick read of our patents. What's your general feeling about it?
You see, this company has some patents around this whole system for configuring a network, meaning how two people operate in a network. And so it's a network communication control system. And there's this thing called a communication object, which is really could be an email or something you send. And they identify the individual to get that object. And they identify the individual from some database. And what happens is that the sender and receiver become what's called an affinity group. So a sender is going to send something, a receiver is going to receive something. That's an affinity group. And so what this patent does, it says, let's define this affinity group, and then we're going to generate a sort of test, if you will. Is that sender going to be somebody I want to receive information from? And so this patent covers this whole general idea of an affinity group, defining it, and using software to determine whether the affinity is close enough for a particular object or email to get through. And so this is a very broad idea, this idea of sort of having a way to know whether I should receive. These patents start to build on that technology to make those affinity groups relate to each other, et cetera. So I look at a lot of communications patents, quite honestly, right? And this idea of having an affinity group for security, for stopping spam and all the rest, I thought was very novel, to tell you the truth, because I've read thousands and thousands of these kinds of patents.
How would you value this? I mean, I know you discussed a valuation process, but how would you value this?
Yeah, so we do 2 or 3 valuations, IP valuations a month at IP Capital. So we're pretty expert at it. A lot of our valuations have end up helping investors invest or acquirers acquire. Even in court, our valuations have been used when we're trying to resolve some dispute. But the way to look at this is you have to first figure out what the starting market is. So just a little exploration here. I mean, there's a number of different markets that this applies to, thinking about an affinity group and having security and spam. So one is sort of just the high level, mobile services market. And you sort of think about that, and that's like a $1.7 billion market, and it's growing quite rapidly. So that market's large. There's another market, if you just want to get down to a smaller segment, looking at anti-spam software market, and that's a $2.7 billion market as well. And that thing's growing at about 24%. So just a quick snapshot of the markets show that at least those 2 markets, and there are more, are in the multi-billions of dollars. So what that means is that when you value a patent, you start with the top market, and then you say, well, what percentage of that market can I take? Is this technology going to be something that each one of those players in the market would want? Answer is yes. So instead of taking 2 or 3 billion, 4 billion and dividing it down by 10%, we're probably going to keep it near 80, 90%. But then you ask yourself the question of that, which one of the companies in that market would want to license or buy the patents? And I'll talk about this in a moment. The number of companies involved in this are quite large, and they're sophisticated with IP and respect IP. So that's good. And then you look at average royalty rates and things like that. Those are 3%, 2.5%. So when you start to add all this up and try to take a net present value even over 5 years with the cost of capital, you come to recognition that this will be highly valued in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars kind of range. I don't know the specifics, don't hold me down to that, but we can help do evaluation. We do it all the time to kind of get specifics. And when we do evaluation, Ray, one of the outputs is it's kind of a strategy of where the sensitivity to the valuation is and who to go to for a second, third, et cetera. So I felt comfortable at least getting on this video, talk about our valuation approach and at least rounding up some numbers. This isn't a $2 or $3 million patent play at all. This is a very significant patent licensing program.
So John, you're saying our patent valuation would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars?
Very likely.
Yeah. So John, what would be the most attractive licensing opportunities we can find?
in one of the markets, right, is the anti-spam market, and there are many companies there. So security issues with spam, things like what do you do when you have been spammed, et cetera. And that I mentioned is a $2.7 billion market. So I don't have a handle on or a knowledge of those companies specifically. But in the mobile and carrier space, where these guys could actually embed it in their software systems, these are the AT&Ts, the Verizons, Deutsche Telekom, SoftBank, Vodafone, things of that nature, BT Group, Comcast. And we work with a lot of these companies. And I think they're readily open to these kinds of discussions. I would advise the company that if they're going to try to really license these companies, or that one of the cool things is they're going to be developing products. So they might want to buy your products more than they want to license it. But let me just talk more specifically. So we got an affinity group concept, right? And that's used right now in some of the patents to make sure the network is secure. But one could imagine building out a whole bunch of inventions on software as a service. Now that I have this module, what would I do with it? Could I advertise through this module? It wouldn't be strange to say that affinity group could create a social media connection, right? So I have my affinity, you have your affinity, maybe we're cut from the same cloth. Maybe we want to be a social media. So you could see a social media affinity group, but there's many software as a service models. And today these software service models are being patented. So I could see easily half a dozen patents on software as a service. I think one of the things is the unique use cases you can build out. How would Facebook use this, right? They might use it to determine who you talk to or who you don't talk to. But how would Apple use it in its iOS? Because you need to have some sort of thing in the OS that might be threading through the communications portal to basically determine if there's an affinity or not. So I could see operating system level inventions where this stuff gets embedded in the OS when it gets called up, when it is used. And then one of the nice things is you can take this invention and a set of inventions, and note that we talked about the network. But what we see is inventions in the network move all through the value chain of communications. So I could see Ray developing some technology that might work at the edge near my communications mobile device specifically, without even the network. In other words, it could be local affinity groups that I don't need the internet for. But I can also see sort of integrating it across the value chain. What would cellular do with this? For instance, there's spam attacks all the time. Why wouldn't a cellular team, develop this technology and use it to stop emails from even leaving the server, right? To go through the network, not allow it to. So you can see that would reduce network traffic, and there's inventions there. And then one of the things which I really loved about what Ray and the team have put together is this idea of AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Obviously, that network group, the affinity group, is going to be learned. It's, my affinity for one thing is going to be different than another, and I'll have a higher score for the things I love the most versus the things I don't, et cetera. So the AI and ML component, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of inventions in this area. I know that because I do it every day. One of the things I think is going to happen is that quantum computing is going to interact with this technology. I think there's going to be a set of inventions, Ray, on how the user is seeing the affinity groups, how they're building, how many times they've been approached, et cetera. And then how you can use that as a profile and how you can manage your own profile. I think the administrative side is going to be like Splunk is managing their networks. I think they'll add user interfaces relative to spam icons that deal with your technology. I could just see a map of the network, has an icon, and that's put on top of each server based on what's going on in the network. So I can see network stuff. I can see AI ML stuff. I can see the value chain, the edge computing. I can see the use cases like Facebook and iOS. And also, I do this because the intellectual property business is such that the law of numbers is really one of those things that we find. If you were to plot the value of an M&A on the y-axis versus the number of patents on the x-axis, you'll find at least 10 to 15 patents is where the multiples go from 3.5x to 20, 30, 100x in terms of multiples on revenues or EBITDA. So I'm a firm believer that intellectual property adds value to businesses, and that's what we do.
Hey, I'm looking forward to getting started.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks an awful lot for your help.